Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have Delegate Riley Ingram with us today. Good to see you.
Thank you, Woody.
And Delegate Don Adams, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Mr. Chairman, counties, cities, and towns.
Yes, sir.
Busy days this 45-day session. How are things going in this second week?
Everything is busy. I mean, it's from morning to night. I had to be here this morning at 7 a.m. And you know, it's a full day. And sometimes you have to be somewhere 2 or 3 places at one time at the same time. And but I enjoy it, Woody. I enjoy it.
Well, thank you for being here. And Delegate Adams, what is a day in the life for you? This is your second session, yes. And I assume you've gotten used to the frenetic pace, but what's your day like?
I usually get up around 4. I do a lot of reading of the bills and answer emails, and then go to the various constituent meetings that I have, or subcommittee meetings and session like everyone, and caucus, and I really enjoy it. The frenetic pace is very familiar to me. It's a different environment, but having worked in hospitals most of my life, it sort of has that sort of, you never know what's going to happen vibe to it, and I enjoy it a lot.
So I take it, as a nurse practitioner working in hospitals, you are a member of a team that attends to patients and others. Is there any difference between that environment and what you experience here in the House of Delegates?
It's actually fairly similar, and when you said that, I didn't actually think of it like that. And even when I was a kid, I was on the swim team. It's an individual sport, but it's part of a team. I think when you're a nurse practitioner and a hospitalist, you're doing something individually as part of a team. When you're a member of the legislature, you're doing some individual representing the district, as well as part of the team that is, I'm a Democrat, but also part of the larger team of being a member of the House. So yeah, it's great.
And how does this differ from when you were a letter carrier?
Yes, I worked at the post office, and I had no idea that I would ever be in public service. And I carried mail in the city of Hopewell for 9 years, but I carried the rural route, and in town I carried a walking route. As a matter of fact, I worked, I carried the downtown route, and the gentleman, Mr. Gordon, that had the pawn shop there, he said, Riley, he said, you're not a letter carrier. I said, yes, sir. He said, well, he said, I'm going to give you a title. He said, I'm going to make you in charge of downtown distribution. so I was a letter carrier, was in charge of downtown distribution.
So is that how you first started meeting constituents that got you elected to your first office?
Yes, and let me tell you what, it helped me. Well, I went into the real estate business, and that was in 1967. And I was working at the post office, and I was part-time in the real estate business. Woody, even with overtime, I made $11,800 to $12,500 working at the post office, even with overtime. The first year I was in the real estate business part-time, I made $3,700. Well, the second year, though, I made $20-some thousand. This was back in 68 and 69. That was a lot of money. So I quit the post office in 1969. And I have to tell you this story, Woody. I'll never forget it. My dad came up during the Depression. And I just bought a brand new 69 Chevrolet, just had a new baby, just bought a new house, and all this stuff. And my dad called, we didn't have cell phones back then, and Dad called me on the phone and left a message. They left a message there at my desk at the post office to call my dad. So I went by, and real quick,
So this was a message that was written down on a piece of paper.
So I went to the phone, called my dad, and he said, "Son, could you stop by for a minute?" I said, "Yes, sir." So I went by, and he said, "Son, have a seat." So I sat down on the couch, and he said, "You just bought that new car?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You just had a new baby?" I said, "Yes, sir." "You just bought that new house?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "And you're quitting that secure job at the post office?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I have one question for you, son." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Have you lost your mind?" But I've never looked back. I knew I could go back to the post office. But that was
Great. Now you want to make some changes to state government, I understand it. You want our governor to be able to serve more than one term.
I do. I mean, well, currently the governor can serve more than one term, but they can't do it consecutively. And having been a former state government employee, I just believe that it certainly would benefit our Commonwealth to have a sort of a more lengthy vision of how the leadership should be provided to state government employees, as well as just the general focus of the Commonwealth to have more vision. I think that this isn't a new idea at all, but I think now is a great time to do that for a couple of reasons. You know, the last I believe that the last governor that we had that was interested in this, and also a member of the House, was Bob McDonnell, and I feel like having Governor Northam, who wouldn't benefit from this legislation, but who has also been a member in the General Assembly, these are people that have valuable backgrounds to know how to really look at the executive power and the legislative power and come to the table and put out there how we rebalance the power if we were to extend the option for people to vote for a consecutive term governor. So I think it's the perfect time to do it. It makes a lot of sense to me for a number of reasons. But I think, when you look at how short the governorship is relative to the way the budget is put out, how much influence they really have on such a huge number of state employees, I think it's just better for productivity and morale and just the overall betterment of the Commonwealth to have vision, if the people choose through a vote, that is sustained, and the accountability of that vote. It is a mechanism to actually hold our governors accountable to the people for what they do, whereas now you don't really have that standard beyond just the person pledging to do a good job.
And Delegate Ingram, you've been around long enough to have been confronted with this issue.
We've had this bill many times before. In fact, Bob Perkey used to put, on the Republican side, used to put that in all the time. But Woody, the problem that I see with it, our governor of Virginia has a lot of power. Mm-hmm. He appoints so many commission members. And that's why, I don't think we should, I think we're different. We're the only state that does not allow that. That's right. But I think that Virginia is different, and I think that we should stay with the one-term governor because unless you've shifted some of the power. But most of the governors don't want to shift the power, and I understand that. But whether the governor is Democrat or Republican, I still support the fact of one term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it would be when we're looking now, we're likely confronting the issue of taking some of the legislative power away from, in the whole idea of an independent redistricting committee, and I think that writing may be on the wall. So we already have some change in our power base, and I think it's a good time then to say, well, let's really have a conversation about it, and maybe we should be looking at the legislature making appointments to X amount of, so I think it's a good time to have the conversation.
My idea, and I'm not by myself, there's a few others that feel the same way. I would like to see a true bipartisan commissioner. What I mean by that is, and like you said, put the governor out of it, but have like 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, okay? Say 8 total. Or you could have 8 on each side or 5 on each side, whatever, from the Senate and the House to redraw the lines and then have it, see true bipartisanship. Woody, when I was first elected, the Democrats were in control. This was in 1991. My district went from Hopewell through parts of Prince George County, Dinwiddie County, Nottoway County, Amelia County, Powhatan County, and Chesterfield County. When I went to Powhatan, well, all the way to the Cumberland County line took me over an hour. But when I was at the edge of the Powhatan at Chesterfield, John Watkins, that was in the House at that time, I could see his house from my district. It took me 55 minutes from Hopewell to get to where I was in Powhatan at the district. And I could see John Watkins' house. Now, so that's what I'm saying. Two wrongs don't make a right, okay? But it is political, there's no doubt about it, and you're not going to change the politics in it unless you have it a true bipartisan commission. So that's just my feeling.
And it's certainly time to have this discussion as well, given the fact that it was only 5 years ago that the congressional lines were redrawn, and now you're facing the same thing, at least on the House side, in terms of a master in the process of coming up with a map for approval by a federal district court judge.
Right, that's right. And I'm not sure when we're going to see that map. I heard
really,
sometime in February, possibly.
We don't, Woody. I mean, that's true. What Delegate Adams just said, we don't know really what the final plan is going to be. It's supposed to be released by March, I think. But, you know, what year was it that they had to run 2 times? They ran this year, and then they ran again next year, and then they ran 3 in 3 years. They ran 3 times. Mm-hmm. I hope that doesn't happen again. Of course, Woody, I won't be here anyway because I'm going to be. I'm going to retire, not from the real estate business, but I'm going to retire
so
from
is
General
this an
Assembly.
announcement?
Huh? Well, yes, but most everybody knows it. I've announced it in my questionnaire, my mailer that I send out at Christmas time, and but Woody, I enjoy it. I really do. But I'm 77 years old. Woody, I have to face reality. I need to give someone else a chance. You know, I've been in public service now for, oh my goodness, I served 8 years on the Hopewell Redevelopment Housing Authority, then I served 6 years on the Hopewell City Council as councilman, vice mayor, mayor, and now I've been in General Assembly 27 years. I'm in my 28th year, and there's so many people my age and younger that are checking out, and I don't want to check out over here, that's for sure.
Well, congratulations. I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
Delegate Adams, given your background in nursing, tell us a little bit about some of the legislation that you are pursuing this session in that regard.
Sure. Well, I think you know, most of the legislation I'm putting in this year has to do with improving the specific quality of people's health and transparency bills. Probably what I'm most proud of is sort of tops off the program that I spent the last 4 years developing and implementing with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services with the state. I've since left that agency, but I was hired to establish and create an infrastructure of health supports for individuals leaving training centers into the community, and that was part of the settlement agreement with between the Commonwealth and the federal government. And what I really focused on was creating what I called gap services. There were services that people needed that they received them in the institutions, and yet we didn't have a funding stream for them in community. The General Assembly provided that funding stream, and I created several programs, one of which was several models for dental care. It's the most expensive care to provide the population with intellectual and developmental disabilities. One of the difficulties, especially in the more rural parts of the state, is access to dentists and hygienists who can actually provide care in meaningful ways to people that have the special needs related to being able to desensitize individuals and provide care in an environment that makes the patients feel both safe and get the full spectrum of care that they need. So I built out some trucks, 2 of the trucks that used to be part of the Virginia Department of Health dental program, which no longer exists, and then a more fully loaded truck which would be able to provide sedation services. And what we really needed was the ability to have remote supervision, which the Department of Health had already had put into the code a couple of years ago. We could not get an MOU established, and so I put in legislation this year to get DBHDS written in so they could have remote supervision of hygienists. This will afford individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to get care all over the state in areas where that service is not provided. And fortunately, we were able to get that out of the House the other day and pass through onto the Senate, so that's really important. We also have a transparency bill that just affords the SHEV and the Department of Education and it's the Higher Education Committee, right. and they do a lot of oversight and credentialing, and so it's so that the Department of Health professionals can all communicate, because especially in nursing, it's specific to nursing programs and nursing aid programs, but if they're investigating something, especially some of these for-profit schools, and they're doing it in individual silos, they can be missing bigger problems or having concurrent investigations without knowledge. So this bill just simply says, yes, you can share files with one another, and that will really help us out, because I know I worked a long time in your neighborhood at Southside Regional, and I had nurses that had told me that their school went out of business, and then they subsequently had problems with their licensure. And so it seems like a small bill, but it's really important to ensure quality of life for nurses.
And Delegate Ingram, I know you've been confronted with these issues as a member of the Appropriations Committee, because all of this costs money. I know the transition from those training schools to the community has been difficult for a lot of people. Yes. As a matter of fact, there have been bills introduced by a lot of members to slow down the process. Right. But talk to us about those training centers and what's been happening with them.
Woody, that is an excellent question, and we're still working on that. We have closed down some, but Woody, there are some people that are in these training centers that I don't know where outside of there that they can be taken care of.
And we're talking about adults now who have been there in many cases since they were children.
Woody, yes. There are some people in the training centers that have been there almost all their life, 30 years, 35, 40 years and more. And this is a way I've toured so many of the homes that believe it or not, they have the bathing inclines, with porcelain, the whole thing, and the lifts. I mean, it's remarkable what they can do, but there's still some problems there. We have slowed the process down because we have come to the point where we're looking at what we can do, what we can afford to do, and of course and Delegate Adams knows too, healthcare is a big, major part of our budget, and we need to take care of these people that cannot take care of themselves. And so we are going much slower, in trying to do what this is, plus the Justice Department and the whole thing says that we cannot institutionalize these people. And so we're trying to do everything we can, but that's a tough mission. It really is.
It is. Now, Delegate Adams, how does Medicaid fit into this, the expansion of Medicaid, if at all?
So it's a separate issue than the expansion. Medicaid. So Medicaid is a funding stream from partially from the federal government and the state government. The expansion specifically had to do with funding healthcare for people in a gap who didn't meet the former Medicaid requirements. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities, especially people on waiver, they in the last year and a half were rolled into the Medicaid programs, which are managed by the managed care organizations. So there are seven health insurance companies that oversee the managed Medicaid contracts, and the intent of that optimally would have been that all care is provided for a fixed rate. That's not exactly how it works out, and unfortunately, I think that there's a lot of work to be done in how those contracts are managed so that people, especially with developmental disabilities that are coming out of training centers, get the full spectrum of care that they need to get. I have a lot of opinions about this, and I don't, I believe that because it's such a small subset of people, it was not the best decision to have 7 different insurers take over that care, because this population does require a lot of attention and detail and specific services, and it's very difficult to do that well when you have so many different options. If there had been only a couple of options for this carve-out, they could have built these programs more robustly and, in my opinion, offered a fuller breadth of services. While the contracts may say they offer X service, the reality is that isn't happening, and that is why the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services implements the Health Support Network to supplement those things that aren't happening. So I think there's a great deal of work to be done. I think that we should have more oversight of DMAS, and I feel like, our biggest issue, a lot of times what you hear in the paper related to Medicaid has to do with fraud or something. That is not our issue. Our issue is really making sure that cost containment, making sure there's a lack of waste, that we're really looking at more of the operational implementation, and look behind to ensure that we are providing the best preventative care in addition to the acute care that we'll see in the hospital. So it's a complicated issue. It's something that I'm very passionate and I love a lot. But I think that one more thing about healthcare that we're not talking about, that is it's an absolute crisis that we're not discussing, is the rate of dementia and the burden that will be upon our entire nation and in the Commonwealth in the next 10 years, when we have the juxtaposition of our baby boomers who are sort of at the peak of many people being in a much older category, and at the same time we know that much of our country is getting heavier. They're getting sicker because of the heaviness, obesity and weight-related disorders, and now we have this just huge escalation in dementia, and we do not have an infrastructure to support that. And one of the things that I think is really important is that we're going to have a different conversation that looks at how do we get back to extended family relationships, and how do we address this, because my folks, part of their dream, as their American dream, was to have their children all go to college, or and make sure that they had families, and then that they left some kind of legacy, small, big. Many parents want to leave something to. This will not be an option as we go forward, because the long-term care services will deplete all of that. And so I don't think that's what we didn't aspire to work for that. I don't think.
I think that's a good point, especially in terms of, you're right, the advancing age of our population here. You got a lot of people on Medicare but are very poor. They become dual eligibles, because then they go on Medicaid for long-term care, because most people don't have long-term care insurance. So that's a huge problem, isn't it?
Well, that's very true. But let me tell you another big problem that we have is the drug problem. It is out. It's just completely out of hand, Woody. I toured a plant over next to Richmond Airport. I almost said Byrd Field, because I still say Byrd Airport, but it's Richmond International Airport. It's in my district, and the gentleman that's the head of it, he said that he had 4 openings, and he said that he is having a tough time hiring people because he could not pass the drug test. So it was a group of us, Democrats and Republicans. We toured the Advan 6 plant in Hopewell, which used to be Honeywell, and they sold that out and separated that. And they told us the same thing, that this man, they said they interviewed, I think it was 10 people, and only 4 of them out of the 10 passed the drug test.
Only 4.
Only 4 out of 10. And then it's people every day that are dying from an overdose. What happens is they take a little bit of cocaine or whatever, and it makes them feel good. So then they take a little more, and then they take a little more, and next thing you know, the heart just explodes. And it's such a shame. And I don't know what we can do about it, because law any law, I mean, it's already against the law, okay? So it makes no difference because you can make all the laws in the world, but I don't know what to do about it. The law is already there. That's not going to solve it. I don't know how we're going to solve it, but it's definitely a big problem.
And of course, we have the opioid crisis that's still with us. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, how important is housing in terms of health care? Because where people live makes a difference, especially their ability to get good food, for example. Some people live literally in housing deserts because they don't have access to wholesome food markets, for example. So, so how important is that in healthcare?
Well, I think this is all of these issues are interrelated, and they're inextricably linked. Health, good health, transportation, housing, food. All of these are interlinked, and so what we see is where there is poor food quality and poverty is linked together, and there's poor health outcomes. We look at Petersburg, for example, where the economy is highly depressed, the unemployment rate is very high, people's ability to get primary care is low. Some of the sickest people I ever cared for were in Petersburg. And we're just, 10 miles from MCV, and I've worked at MCV for a long time. You cannot get away from the need for people to, and this I think falls into the opioid crisis. You need to have purpose and hope and optimism and opportunity and homes and shelter and nutrition. These are all interrelated, and I feel like it would do us well to look at these more holistically like that. And actually, I put in a bill about that last year. I put in a bill again this year. And the mission of it is really to have a public-private partnership think tank for how do we use our resources better to make a commonwealth that it's established as a commission for wellness and opportunity. And how do we use our resources best to that end so that all communities can benefit from these fundamentals, sort of the bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy, for people that know that. And I think that these are, even when we talk about the balance of power, I mean, I think we need to be looking at the budget differently, and maybe the legislature needs to work more with state government and the private sector to say, hey, these resources, if we were really funding what we believe in, we would be doing it this way, a little more creatively.
Mr. Chairman, 30 seconds, your Corvette bill.
Yes. I have been asked, Woody, for the last 5 years, the Corvette clubs, cars that do not come from the factory with a front license plate. They've shot down every bill with no license plate in the front, but this one is unique. It says a car no taller than 48 inches, fiberglass body, and all this. So, I'd like to see it pass, but I don't know if it'll pass or not. It's just for that small group of cars, a Corvette, okay?
Well, congratulations on your retirement, Riley Ingram, and thank you, Don Adams, for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.